Well, a lien is a type of a security interest that's granted by the person who owns some asset to the party who holds the lien, and it's held as security for the debt so that the lien remains encumbering whatever title, whatever ability the person who has the asset has, can't sell, can't transfer until the lien is paid off. And there are a bunch of different kinds of liens. One way to think of this is think in terms of two big columns. One is consensual liens, the other is non-consensual liens. So in the consensual liens, as the name suggests, these are liens that if you have granted someone a lien, you consent to it. You say, yep, I give you this lien. Typical examples, you go buy your home and you reach into your pocket and know you don't have enough to pay cash. So you take out a loan. You grant the bank, the mortgage company, a lien against the property. So that mortgage, whether it's a first mortgage or a second mortgage, is a consensual lien because in exchange for the bank lending you that money so you can make the purchase, you are consenting to the bank having a claim against the home so that if you don't make the monthly payments, the bank can foreclose on the property, take the property back and turn around and sell it to recover its interest. Another typical example of a consensual lien, it's time to go buy a car. You trot on over to the dealership, you see the car you want, gee, you don't have the cash to pay for it outright, so you take out a loan. And the creditor then who lends you the money gets a lien against the car, meaning if you don't make the payments, the creditor can take the car back. Now, for these liens to be perfected, they have to be recorded. And typically they're going to be recorded with the appropriate governmental entity. So here in California, for example, if it's a home mortgage, that lien, that deed of trust is going to be recorded with the appropriate county recorder's office. Or if it's a car, that lien will be recorded with the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV. Yet another kind of consensual lien is referred to as a floating lien. Now, this is something that for people who don't have their own businesses where they're marketing merchandise may seem a little foreign. But let's say you have a storefront and you're selling groceries, you're selling whatever the products are. And so you get a shipment in from the supplier. Now, one thing you could do is pay as soon as you get the shipment or even beforehand, in which case you don't owe the supplier any money. But suppose you carry a balance each month. Well, that supplier then will hold what's called a floating lien against the merchandise. So as you sell it, you're eventually going to repay the vendor. Maybe you pay once a month, once a week, however the payment schedule is. In the meantime, the vendor has a lien against the merchandise so that if you don't pay, the vendor can take the merchandise back. Now, why is it called a floating lien? Well, it's called a floating lien because there isn't a specific block of merchandise that is fixed as having the lien. Because you get the merchandise, you sell it, you get new merchandise, you sell it. There's sort of a river of merchandise, if you want to think of it that way. And so the lien attaches to whatever the merchandise is at the time. Hence, it's called a floating lien. So those are examples of consensual liens. How about non-consensual liens? Well, these are liens you don't consent to. So, for example, suppose someone sues you and gets a judgment against you in the California Superior Court. Well, that person then can take that judgment and record a lien against assets that you may have. Most typically, it'll be against your residence. So that is called a judicial lien, or sometimes referred to as a judgment lien, because it was obtained as a result of a judgment after a lawsuit. So that's not something that you think, oh, sure, take a lien against my property. So it's non-consensual. Yet another non-consensual lien is something called a mechanic's lien. Now, in spite of the fact that the term mechanic is associated with the term, it doesn't necessarily only apply to mechanics. So somebody may do some work for you, let's say paint your house or do a remodeling of the kitchen or whatever it is, and you don't pay right away. Well, that work person can record a lien against your property, and that lien remains until you pay that person in full, and then the lien will be released. Another example of a non-consensual lien is a tax lien. When Uncle Sam has been drumming his metaphorical fingers on the table, wondering, when are you going to pay your tax liability? Well, that may give rise to a tax lien that Uncle Sam or Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, may record against your property. And it does have to be recorded in the county where the property sits. So if a tax lien is recorded in the wrong county, it's not perfected. Another type of tax lien is called a secret lien. Now, in spite of the fact that it sounds like espionage is in place, it doesn't necessarily mean there's some state secret associated with it. Instead, what happens is the taxing authority has a lien against all of your assets, and most particularly your retirement. So even though retirement is generally thought of as an exempt asset in bankruptcy, it's not necessarily exempt from the depredations of the taxing authorities. So those are some examples of non-consensual liens. There is a kind of lien that sort of straddles the consensual, non-consensual boundary, and that's a statutory lien. Some liens can be recorded just because there is a statute that enables them to be recorded. So it isn't necessarily being recorded because somebody sued you or because you're voluntarily taking out a mortgage, but rather because there's some statute that gives the lien holder the right to record it. A very common example is a lien that is recorded by a homeowners association. So you're not making your HOA due payments. Well, then the HOA can record a statutory lien against your property. And it's called a statutory lien because there is a statute that on the books here in California, under California law, that gives that entity, that HOA, the right to record the lien against your property. Now, ultimately, why are these liens being recorded? Well, they're being recorded because if you don't make the payments, the creditor can foreclose on the asset, or if it's a car, for example, repossess the car. And the lien remains there, which makes it impossible for you to refinance or sell the property unless, as part of the transaction, you pay off that encumbrance. So those are the ideas behind liens, and there's a whole area of law just dealing with liens.